It's 2024. We've all finished our playthroughs of Elden Ring, Space Marine, Devil May Cry and Metal Gear Solid 5 for the third time by now, and yet, when I look at the current slate of games coming out, I can't help but feel this very ominous sense of detachment. I mean, a lot of them look cool, and maybe I'm leaning too much on jaded preconceptions of being disappointed, with stuff like the modern God of War and Cyberpunk 2077 falling a bit short of my expectations. But in reality, nothing truly brand new resonates with me in quite the same way as some of these older, classically established franchises do. Well, the ones that still try to respect what they were originally all about anyway. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a flawed game, but the vision and execution on what actually works is completely laser-focused, and I think there might not be a lot of competition when it comes to trying to fill that niche of hardcore sandbox fantasy action games. Monster Hunter Wilds is looking like it'll be just as fun as World was way back when, with lots of cool monster designs, complex AI behaviors and limitless mechanics to specialize in. Let's also raise some hands for the fact we are getting Dragon Ball Sparking Zero to carry on the legacy of the Budokai Tenkaichi series once more. I could keep naming a ton of genuinely fun, well-made games that clearly come from a place of love. For those, I generally don't even hold them to a really high standard. As long as they're fun, interesting and make sense within their own rules, they get a thumbs up from me. But amidst all that, I think I need to do my part in letting people know about Armored Core, both as a franchise and as a perfect example of what a game should strive for even when it's on its 16th installment and counting. Today, I'm here to talk about a game that took much of the world by surprise last year, pushing the popularity of a genre long forgotten toward new heights. If you're familiar with From Software, I'm sure you might have already either played it yourself or heard about it. But if you're not, let me introduce you to Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, and make my case for why I think you should play it right now. First off, what is Armored Core 6 all about? What actually is an Armored Core? An Armored Core, or AC, is a highly customizable modular mech that can completely decimate most conventional combat forces. They are piloted by skilled individuals that carry out all kinds of mercenary work, ranging from infiltration operations to search and destroy or even all-out warfare. ACs in Armored Core 6 are not the most technologically advanced weapon, being surpassed by some custom-made special unit forces, but what they lack in raw specifications or firepower, they make up for with sheer versatility. The whole point of an Armored Core is that it can be custom-tailored to the pilot's preferences down to each minute detail. This ultimately leads to standout ace mercenaries actually outperforming even the craziest tech there is, either due to experience, compatibility with their machine, or just sheer resourcefulness. These mercenaries have been called by many names in the past, but we like to call them Ravens, as that's their official original designation, harkening back to the first ever Armored Core. In Armored Core 6 you play as a mercenary, a Raven if you will, and you're tasked with several missions over the course of an overarching plotline that takes place in the planet of Rubicon 3. Speaking of, Armored Core's core gameplay loop is divided between two major instances: the customization, often referred to as the garage, where you'll be free to buy, sell, assemble and paint your very own AC from scratch with modular parts, and the actual piloting of the mech during the dedicated campaign mode, AI Arena, or player versus player duels. Now both the customization and combat are equally feature-rich and mechanically deep, with lots of things to min-max, tweak and learn. The idea is that you'll want to not only be an effective pilot on the battlefield, but also a smart AC designer in order to cater to your piloting strengths to achieve better performance during your assignments. You'll spend just as much time tinkering with your mech as you will feeling like an unstoppable killing machine, and that's where most of the fun comes from. This is a game all about expressing yourself, learning through experience, experimentation, and usually it does its best to represent the adapt and overcome philosophy present throughout most other From Software titles you might be familiar with. Though there wouldn't be any way to convey this and much more if the actual meat of the game, its story mode, weren't any good. It's a melancholic, borderline tragic, cryptic, yet digestible narrative that entices the player to go along through its campaign in order to see what's coming next.
You must be Raven. One of the infamous handler Walter's hounds.
In Rubicon 3 you'll get to experience a conflict of interests at an absurdly large scale, where big corporations, what I can best describe as space government, and the indigenous inhabitants of the planet all fight for control of a multi-purpose substance called coral. If you're familiar with the world of Dune, then coral is very analogous to spice, but in this case it's not only an incredible energy source, but also sentient, capable of developing a full-on consciousness in some cases. This is a game whose themes are heavily steered towards personal agency, the horrors of warfare and weaponization of science, what it means to be human, and overexploitation of the environment, to name a few. It's a full-on sci-fi opera with twists, turns, and a whole lot of metaphoric, environmental and contextual storytelling which answers questions just as much as it leaves things open to interpretation. So if you come to it thinking, oh cool shooty big robots with big guns, you will come to the right place indeed, but it's much more than that. Armored Core 6 is Gundam meets Dune, meets Blade Runner, meets a bit of Dark Souls, and honestly that's the best short descriptor I can give you. Armored Core 6 stands out from other games for a lot of reasons, but there are some key qualities I think really set it apart. For one, although a topic of contention, especially between newcomers to the franchise who are experiencing Armored Core for the first time and the longtime fans, I think 6 has an almost perfect balance between depth and accessibility. The AC customization is very robust, adhering to a lot of things already established in the series before, like lots of stats, meaningful choices, and a ton of fun ways to build your machine. Although not as diverse in parts as some of their predecessors, the ones present in the game have real, meaningful impact on your playstyle. For example, building an armored core with tank legs makes its way of locomotion completely different from a regular bipedal model. Using energy weapons completely reverses the logic of using ballistic weaponry, and the list goes on. At the same time, while experienced players can delve into the nitty-gritty and find plenty to chew on, newcomers won't be overwhelmed. Well, at least not as much as they would be before, since the game allows you to bypass its complexity at first and gradually understand it as you progress, unlocking further knowledge and skills on how the game operates. Despite this seemingly complicated building and tinkering process, the actual combat remains tight, responsive, and most importantly, just really fucking fun. I don't think you'll ever have a boring moment throughout the whole playtime, since Armored Core 6 keeps things going and going and going, always at full speed, yet always well paced. Your AC becomes an extension of you as you master its controls, and it will slowly yet surely turn from a hulking clunky machine to a super agile weapon of mass destruction. It's good to point out that configuring different loadouts ends up having a massive effect on the moment-to-moment gameplay, encouraging multiple playthroughs with entirely different strategies and approaches. Despite this wild degree of freedom, the game manages to maintain fairness, offering an initial ease of piloting that makes it accessible. With things like an auto-lock-on system and generous checkpoints, yet still layering in advanced mechanics, like free aim, boost canceling, and a mission ranking system, for players who want to push their skills further beyond. This means your abilities as a pilot evolve throughout the game, as you're constantly tested in new ways, especially during boss fights. AC6 is a very meaty, substantial, deep game, but it avoids bloat, sticking to a concise yet rich sandbox that operates under a well-defined rule set that not only applies to the players but also the AI-controlled enemies, for the most part. What's more, one of the things I think all From Software games do incredibly well, and this game is no exception, is how it respects the player's intelligence by teaching you how to play without excessive handholding. The first mission alone is, in my opinion, one of the best tutorial experiences I've had in a long while, and being thrown new problems to solve during the course of missions teaches you how to make use of the fact you can customize your AC for any situation. You just need to study and prepare for it, trial and error. Or, well, you can just punch your way through if you're brave enough. Though the gameplay is fantastic, I cannot praise the world building and attention to detail enough. They are on a whole other level, from the massive yet rigorously accurate scale of buildings and objects, the destructible environments, to the art style and mechanical design of both the mechs and their weaponry. Every element feels meticulously crafted. The sound design is an auditory masterpiece, with thumping, weighty, and immersive effects that perfectly encapsulate what piloting a 10-meter-tall humanoid walking war crime is. As if these achievements weren't enough, the lore and narrative are deeply engaging, emotional, and amplified by an inspired soundtrack. Shout out to the GOAT, Kota Hoshino, and his crew. That gives the experience a heavily cinematic quality. If you love Blade Runner's soundscape, you're going to absolutely love this one too. Like I mentioned before, there are tons of Armored Core games. Some of them I find do particular things better than 6, lots of them do worse, but the point is, there are a lot of flavors and variations of the basic foundational principles behind these games, so why am I saying you should play this one right now, instead of, say, any of the previous ones? For starters, one of the reasons 6 stands out is because of the barrier of entry. The last AC game before this one was released a good 10 years ago. That's 2 generations of console, and adding insult to injury, it was indeed a console-exclusive title up until now. The fact 6 is available on all current hardware, including PC, eliminates the need to dig into past consoles or hope for remasters that are never to come, because honestly the older games are stuck in publisher hell at this point in time. AC6 is designed for current systems, meaning you can jump in without any technical barriers or compatibility concerns. More importantly, there are no prerequisites to get into it. You don't need to have played the previous Armored Core games to understand what's going on. This one is entirely self-contained, and new players can easily pick it up without feeling like they're missing something essential from earlier installments, which honestly can be quite daunting otherwise. Some of the older Armored Core games are also very infamous for being extremely demanding when it comes to actually physically controlling your mech. But here, things have been quite streamlined. For better or worse, the controls are modern and responsive, and although it comes at a cost for some aspects of gameplay, it does strike a great balance between accessibility and precision, letting you feel in control without it being clunky. Regardless of which entry we focus on, these games' very ethos is about overcoming a particular learning curve. That process can be quite smooth or incredibly aggressive depending on where you start off, and I think despite its depth, The learning curve in AC6 is leagues more forgiving than any of the previous games. This is mainly due to its gradual progression system, less complicated menus, actually fairly decent descriptions and a whole lot of streamlined mechanics, which is also a contentious topic, but like it or not, this helps ease players into the franchise. One thing I hope we all agree on is that this iteration of the testing grounds is fantastic. The fact you can just pop into it and make changes to your AC on the fly and test it out on stationary or live targets without any sort of loading is a blessing that keeps on giving, since obviously, you'll spend a lot of time doing this. The ability to fine-tune your builds before taking them into real missions in such a convenient way is not present in previous titles, providing yet another barrier of entry to experimentation, since you do have to load in and out of testing zones to make changes and that shit takes forever. Also, shout out to the tutorial VR missions. These are much appreciated and actually teach important concepts in a good, non-frustrating way. On top of that, the game provides lenient checkpoints, perhaps too lenient in fact, and a forgiving in-game economy, perhaps too forgiving. Nonetheless, this sort of contributes to a less harsh penalty for failure. You can experiment, fail, and retry without feeling too frustrated or set back by long stretches of lost progress. The game's economy doesn't punish you heavily for trying new loadouts or strategies, which further encourages this. Though, to be fair, I would love it if it was indeed a bit more strict in that department. Something I also feel is incredibly relevant, at a contrast to a lot of popular recent games, is the mission-based structure all Armored Core games have. This makes sense thematically but also functionally, since it's straightforward and a good break from the huge open-world checklist meta, offering focused, bite-sized objectives that end up being more memorable. This also makes it great for those players who might not have hours to invest in long play sessions, which sadly I can relate to more and more. The ability to pick a game up, complete a mission, and then step away without feeling lost or disoriented when you come back later is a huge break from the interaction-hungry, dopamine-gobbling, live service money fountains that plague the space. Finally, and here's a little self-plug, the game has a decently active community. There's always someone hosting a tournament here and there, ridiculously well-made lore videos, and resources that make it easier for new Ravens to dive deeper into the experience. This is true for almost every title in the franchise, as people tend to flock towards their favorite entries, but with AC6 being the most recent, it sports the bigger audience and also the most amount of support for things like mods and community interaction. So, you could start with any game that calls your attention, but I think Armored Core 6 offers the best chance at captivating the most people all around. It might seem like I'm hyping up this game to be the next best thing since forever, and you would be correct, I'm sort of doing that, because to me, it is really special. However, I don't want to just sell you the convincing and positive arguments as to why I think you should give it a shot. Rather, I also want to point out some things to expect and look out for that might make the game less appealing for one reason or the other. So, here are a few aspects of AC6 you might want to keep in mind before you dive deep into it. One of these things to look out for are the steep difficulty spikes that occur during certain boss fights. While the game generally maintains a steadily increasing encounter difficulty, there are moments when the challenge can jump unexpectedly, forcing players to really take a good look at the situation and rethink their approach or adjust their AC builds to make it through. Personally, I think this is a good thing and I would actually encourage it more. But I know Ravens who like to really over-specialize into one build, and to that effect the game can really punish you for not adapting. If you're the type of player that is a bit stubborn when it comes to that, it's definitely possible to still beat the game, you might just have a harder time. Even more so, despite updates that aim to fine-tune the game, some elements still aren't really that well balanced. There are weapons that feel overpowered or underwhelming depending on the situation, which can lead to some sections feeling either too easy or frustratingly hard. Variety is the spice of life, but keep in mind this does happen from time to time. No matter how streamlined and, let's say, dumbed down Armored Core 6 is compared to its predecessors, it still remains a complex game with a lot to absorb. From stats that don't really behave in the way you would think they do, to secret modifiers and significant combat tech, there's still a deep system in place that can be overwhelming, particularly for players who are new to the series or From Software's unique design philosophy. On top of that, while the single-player campaign is extremely, and I mean extremely polished and engaging, it is ultimately finite. Once you've completed the story, there isn't much beyond that in terms of new content, and the multiplayer mode, while pretty fun, lacks the competitive edge you can find in other multiplayer-focused games. It's more of a casual, lighthearted experience rather than a fiercely competitive one. Though this doesn't stop many in the community from making it really serious, just take that as you will. Another point to keep in mind is that AC6 is not an open-world game. Although the individual areas and maps can be quite large and sometimes even pretty intricate, the gameplay is exclusively mission-based, with specific routes and sectioned-off areas. For those who enjoy more open-ended exploration, the structured mission design might feel somewhat restrictive, especially if you're coming from the Souls side of From Software. Keep in mind this is more of a getting straight to the point type of game. But don't be fooled. What it lacks in breadth it has in depth. One thing that I think more games should try to do is not adhering to a classic difficulty slider. In this case, Armored Core 6 does away with it and makes it so the way you build your mech and choose to engage with enemies essentially lets you craft your own difficulty. There are weaknesses and patterns to exploit, answers and counters to everything. You just need to be creative enough and use everything at your disposal. This approach shows a great deal of consideration for the player's ingenuity and honestly puts the fun back in challenge, as it should. But some players might not really be into that type of approach to game design, which is why I'm putting it out there. Finally, as with most From Software games, the story can be annoyingly cryptic regarding some events and not everything will be immediately clear. You'll get the general idea of what's happening, but some of the deeper lore and plot points might, and will, take multiple playthroughs or additional outside of the game research to fully understand and appreciate. So if you don't have that sort of patience and prefer a more standard approach to storytelling, this might be a bit of a stickler. I'm writing this slightly after AC6's 1-year anniversary, and as of right now the game is in its best state yet, at least that's what I think. I should point out it's absolutely feature complete, it runs smoothly and there are quite literally little to no bugs. As expected from this team, there is not even a faint trace of microtransactions or anti-consumer practices anywhere near AC6, and although patches have been quite sparse, the ones released so far have been pretty good, enhancing both the single-player and multiplayer experience. Notably, the game features a ranked PvP ladder that wasn't present at launch for those looking for a more competitive objective. One of these updates even introduced new maps to multiplayer and additional full-blown AC parts, all for free, which makes the possibility of similar updates in the future not zero. I can only hope that this kind of support means that there's reason to believe AC6 will receive significant future content. Historically, all mainline Armored Core games have either had direct expansions or sequels, and given how well this title has sold, having introduced the series to a whole new demographic, it's highly likely we'll see one of those. It's also been announced that there will be a CGI episode made by Blur Studio featuring some kind of interpretation of an Armored Core universe, which hopefully will expand the franchise's overall reach and keep it in the spotlight for times to come. With all this being said, what's the key takeaway from all my yapping? In one sentence, Armored Core 6 offers a play how you want sci-fi fantasy, wrapped in complete mecha eye candy and a brutal storyline that makes it incredibly hard to resist for nerds like me, and you, obviously. If your idea of fun is a game that respects your time, your intelligence and your wallet, Armored Core 6 is for you. If you like being creative, solving problems and blast shit up in giant robots while looking absolutely fucking mega cool, Armored Core 6 is for you. If you like incredible galaxy brainwriting, anti-war themes, cyberpunk, sci-fi, and an incredibly profound search for the meaning of being human all wrapped up in layers of metaphors and allegories, Armored Core 6 is for you. If you like building shit, testing it and putting it to use in different scenarios or against other players, Armored Core 6 is for you. If you love games, Armored Core 6 is for you, and if you don't, it's also for you. If you love Armored Core, my channel is for you. If you don't, it can still be, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video and drop a comment on whether or not I managed to convince you to try Armored Core 6 out. If this doesn't work, I'll think of some other way, don't worry. What matters is the journey. For those of you who are already Ravens, remember, stay boosting. Thanks to all of you who watched till the end, and a major shout out to my patrons and supporters. Making videos is a very time-consuming process and it would be really cool if I could eventually turn this into a full-time thing. That being said, if you like what you see and want to help me out in any way you can check out my Patreon page. Once again, thanks to everyone who keeps watching me talk about these silly games. Until next time.